why can't we see the forest for the trees here, right? Like immigrants have made giant contributions to our country. We just don't think of Irish and Italians as immigrants anymore because of a few generations ago. But similarly here, if we look at the Burmese population, 30,000 strong now, mostly on the south side, the number of businesses down there, homes that have been built and purchased, car dealerships, insurance, bankers, grocery stores. There's, I think, like 70 churches that are Burmese churches on the south side. They have revitalized the south side of our city in a very positive way.
We're good? You all ready? You good? Ready? Good? All right, ready? All right.
What's good, y'all? Welcome to the first of what I am dubbing our emergency series, where we talk with folks in the community about some really extremely pressing and incredibly important issues here in the city of Indianapolis, the state of Indiana, and beyond. My name is Patrick Armstrong. I'm the host of the show, and my guest today is the executive director of Exodus Refugee, an organization that has been welcoming refugees and asylum seekers from many countries, cultures, languages, faiths, and political opinions since 1981, during which they've helped thousands of people establish lives here in Indiana and beyond. For the past 10 years, he has been at the helm of Exodus, leading the organization through a number of shifting immigration changes and challenges into this current moment, where being seen as not from here has become more treacherous than ever. We're going to get into it right now, so without further ado, it is my privilege and honor to welcome Cole Varga to the show. Cole, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
100%. First question, how are you?
Been better. I'm hanging in there and trying to stay strong. A lot of the folks that we serve don't have that luxury and are facing a very different 4 years ahead of them.
Definitely. I gave just a little bit of an intro about you, but if you don't mind sharing for folks who are watching or listening who don't know who you are, just a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Like you mentioned, at the helm of Exodus Refugee Immigration, we're a nonprofit here in Indianapolis with a sub-office in Bloomington, and we assist refugees, asylum seekers, foreign-born victims of human trafficking, basically what we would call humanitarian immigrants, help them restart their lives here in Indiana after their lives back home had been torn apart because of persecution, injustice, war. So we do everything from setting up apartments for them, getting them into a new home, get their kids enrolled in school, do case management, mental health, counseling services, legal assistance, youth programming, all kinds of wraparound services to help them adjust and become part of this community.
I love it. You've been there for 10 years now. Can you talk a little bit about how you first got connected to Exodus and what kept you there to now put you in this position to be leading?
Well, 10 years in a leadership role, but I've been there nearly 16 with Exodus. I actually started as an intern, and the board has not been able to get rid of me. I started as an intern while I was in grad school at the University of Indianapolis studying international relations. So I was literally reading about conflicts across the globe, from older ones to present ones, Rwandan genocide to what's going on in Burma, Latin America, and then took this internship with Exodus and was able to help the people, the victims of the atrocities I was reading about. So the second day as an intern, I became sort of an unpaid de facto case manager for a couple of Chinese pro-democracy dissidents that had been involved in Tiananmen that long ago, and just got the bug from there. Like, these are folks that we read about and, you know, have had their entire lives stolen for them just for an ideal that is common here.
Sure.
So worked with them for many months, learned a ton about their history, learned about the Burmese refugees that we were a big part of helping welcome to Indianapolis, the Congolese refugees, Afghans, Iraqis who have helped U.S. forces, fought alongside our guys and were able to resettle because of that. It's something that a lot of folks didn't know about when I took the job. I didn't even realize it existed. And that started to change around 2015, I would say, where resettlement started to become a wedge issue rather than a bipartisan, like, oh yeah, of course we do this. That DNA of that dates back to the post-World War II era.
Sure.
We, as a country, welcomed a ton of Eastern European refugees. So there's some momentum with this.
Yeah. From
World War II to the post-Vietnam era to the Mariel boat lift out of Cuba. We've been doing this for a long, long time. But starting when we started resettling Syrians in the wake of, the Syrian civil war, the Arab Spring, Afghans coming over from the Afghan war, you started to see some fractures in basically the Republican Party about Islamophobia, essentially. Like, why are we bringing these folks? So 2015 rolls around. Then Governor Mike Pence decides he wants to stop us without telling us. He held a press conference that he announced we're going to not welcome any more Syrians to Indiana. We sued him with the help of the heroes at the ACLU and won in federal court. And soon after that, President Trump, jumped into the presidential race and started saying he wanted to deport all Muslims from the country. So we kind of got this spiraling effect after that. And now at this point, it's become a normal talking point in the Republican Party that immigrants and Muslims are not welcome here.
I appreciate you sharing that. You talk about 2015, it becomes this wedge issue in the Republican Party, rooted in Islamophobia, which itself, I think, stems from 2001 with the terrorist attacks. Sure. And do you have a perspective on how that becomes the wedge?
I don't know exactly. You'd have to ask the racists themselves, but I think it's tied into what we're seeing now, just blaming the other for the problems of our country, and unfortunately kicking people that are already down. So refugees, undocumented immigrants, asylum seekers, who are entering the country, some of them like refugees, because we invited them. The U.S. State Department is literally in charge of that program. So the U.S. government is inviting those folks to come over. But nonetheless, blaming our problems on those folks who are just trying to restart their lives, or folks that we promised we would help because they were in the trenches with our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. And because of that, it's unsafe for them to live anymore in those countries. So I remember a few years ago working with an Iraqi man that we helped resettle. He was an interpreter with the U.S. Army. One night, some insurgents put an IED in his front lawn, blew off the front of his house. Luckily, they were in the back of the house, but his dog was killed in that attack. They fled that night up to Kurdistan to safety and eventually got out of the country. But that's the risk that he took to help the U.S. because he wanted a better life in his country of Iraq. And we gave him the chance to come here and start that life. The same thing happened with our Afghan friends that we airlifted over, the 76,000 a couple years ago, right? Atterbury, we had a bunch at Atterbury. My organization, Exodus, helps hundreds of those folks. They were on the front lines too. And now with the Taliban takeover, it is not safe for them to live there. They're pro-democracy leaders. These are even just female doctors that came that they don't want women in power. They don't want women to have rights. Those are folks that are now refugees in our country because of what happened in theirs.
Yeah. And you appreciate you giving all of this context and giving specific anecdotes and real life situations, because for a lot of people who don't believe people who don't look like them should be here, they don't see any of that. They just see a face. They don't know any of this other backstory of how, we actually served this country. We risked our lives and our families' lives to help you. And then we came here under the understanding that we would be okay. Right. We would have refuge. And now you're going to sit here and blame me for what? In the last 3 weeks, since Donald Trump has retaken office, he's assigned a number of executive orders that have either hindered or halted immigration altogether. You've been kind of through this before.
Right.
And what you talked about, something you said stuck out to me. It's like, it's normal now, like the way that we talk about some of this stuff. What is that the biggest difference from 2015, 2016 to now? Or what's a big difference to you, or what is different at the moment?
I'd say the pace and the level of hatred seems to have increased quite a bit. So even let's also be honest that it's not just the right that has been anti-immigrant. The left has as well. So President Obama deported more people than anyone.
Yep.
Biden created a terrible situation down on our border using the CPB-1 app, like kicking people out, mass deportations as well. So this happens regardless. The difference is the rhetoric about talking about these folks and the targeting of people who are here legally. That's the difference under Trump. So what we've seen in the past couple of weeks has been, as far as we're concerned, an executive order that essentially ended the refugee resettlement program for the foreseeable future. Ostensibly, there's 90-day reviews to make sure it's safe and still viable, but he already had 4 years to look at this in the first term. So he knows, him and his team know exactly what the program is already. There's all these odd funding freezes that are happening now. Some of them tied to Elon Musk, of course, but some of them related to full work stoppages at the State Department. So that means not only does the administrative work of resettlement stop stateside, but all the processing that happens overseas ceases as well. So refugees, for those that don't know, are the most vetted individuals entering our country. They've gone through more background checks. Sometimes it takes years and years, if not decades, to actually come here as a refugee. And only very few people are actually invited. So by the time they get here, they've been through 13 federal agencies. Like, we know exactly who they are when they're coming. The State Department signs off on them. So the fact that we're thinking about ceasing that, ending it maybe permanently, does all kinds of damage overseas. It disrupts our agreements with our NATO allies like Turkey, who's currently housing 4 million Syrians. It disrupts all the camps that the UN holds in sub-Saharan Africa that are helping millions and millions of people. And it's keeping families separated. So we had, for example, a young man who was waiting to reunite with his sister. He's been here several years. His sister's supposed to travel in February. All February flights canceled. Another example, an Iranian woman who we just resettled in January. Her husband was supposed to fly to join her in February. Travel deleted, unclear if he'll ever have the chance to come now. So a lot of resettlements based on, of course, the humanitarian aspect of it, but also family reunification. And when you have wars, families get separated.
Right.
But one of the best parts of our job is being there at the airport to see those reunifications
100%
happen. And that's indefinitely on hold.
And so when these like freezes and blocks and cancellations come in, like, are you being given, or are people getting given any notice, or is this just happening and it's like, check back later? Like, how is that? How do you navigate just the ceasing, and how does that even come about?
A lot of incredibly difficult phone calls that my staff had to make in that first week, and a lot of tears with families who thought they were going to see their relatives, their husbands, their children again. We're so close. We're a week away, and it just...
Plane tickets purchased. Like
plane tickets scheduled.
Scheduled.
They were on the books. We were looking for apartments for some of these folks that are coming. So that was a big shock, and now they're sort of left in limbo. And the future of the program itself is somewhat in limbo. During the first Trump administration, we saw a decrease from about 85,000 folks that were coming a year under Obama down to its lowest point ever, which was 11,000 refugees. Okay. So despite the tactics used, Trump did still keep the program alive during the first administration. Sure. At this point, seems like he wants to completely disintegrate it.
So you said that like him and his team had that first 4-year period to really understand, like, and it makes sense now why everything at that time seemed like nothing was working or made sense with what they were doing, but it's because they were just trying to figure it out. And it seems like now that they've gotten back, they've figured it out. And so I wanted to ask, like, I feel like the executive orders, like when I'm and like the rhetoric and everything that's baked in, when I'm reading stuff, it just seems like a fundamental misunderstanding of what they're trying to stop and like shut down. In this case, specifically immigration. Do you think that they misunderstand what it is about immigration, that like why it's a necessary thing, like the processes that we have for specifically for refugees and asylum seekers? Or do you think they understand and it is imperative to them to shut it down?
I think it's very purposeful and targeted racism, not just against refugees, but against all immigrants, right? So another group of immigrants, asylees, mostly who travel through the southern border, asylum is essentially over at the southern border at this point. Even the CPB-1 app that Biden had put in place to get appointments for asylum, they killed that immediately.
With people waiting
for who had appointments, right? So that is, asylum's essentially over. Now, the ACLU National is challenging that in federal court, and there will be, I'm sure, a wave of lawsuits coming on a lot of these executive orders, both at the federal level and some of the nonsense that our state house and our governor are getting up to, which it's not a coincidence they match what's going on in D.C. These are not bright folks that are writing this legislation. This is all coordinated through groups like the Heritage Foundation, which is why the executive order from Braun, one of the first EOs he put out, was almost identical to what some of the things happening at the White House.
Yeah. So I guess in that same vein, I think one of the things that you said as well is like a lot of people don't know just how long it takes to, specifically for refugees, to get into the country. Like it can take a decade for you to really make it. And even at that point, only a few people are actually invited. You've had to go through like a really rigorous process.
That's right.
To make it that far. What are we misunderstanding about this process? And like, what are we missing that we just need to like wake up to?
Well, a couple things. One you started to touch on, and that's just how tiny of a drop in the bucket this is. So globally, there's 122 million displaced people in the world. It's the biggest that number's ever been. So that's folks who are refugees, who are asylum seekers, who are stateless, or who are known as IDPs or internally displaced people. So an example of that is war in eastern Ukraine. A lot of Ukrainians moved to the west of the country. They're still internally in Ukraine, but they're displaced from their homeland.
Like what was happening in Gaza.
As well, correct. So that number is and should be shocking to folks. 122 million people who are not where they should be right now. 43 million of those would be considered refugees. So those are folks outside of their country, usually in a second country. So they fled Syria to a camp across the border in Turkey. They fled from eastern Congo to Rwanda to Kenya. They're in UN camps registered as sort of international refugees and sort of waiting for things to change back home so it's safe to go back, or waiting for the opportunity to go to a third country such as the U.S. So out of 43 million refugees, the U.S. this past year welcomed 103,000. That is utterly nothing. Yeah. Right? And we are the largest refugee resettlement country in the world.
So that's a problem.
That's a problem.
That right there, that math does not math.
It does. It's half of a percent.
I think I appreciate you bringing it up and bringing up the drop in the bucket idea, because like he just signed the executive order banning trans women in sports. And it's like, well, you realize that not only are they 1% of the country, of the population of the country, they're even less of that in college athletics or even at the high school level. Like, why are we targeting the smallest group of people who are also probably our most vulnerable? who need the most support. Right. Why are we afraid of the, I hate to say this, but like, it seems like the minority of the minority. Why are we so afraid of something like that or people like that?
It's a tactic because it has to be. We've been preaching the humanitarian nature of this program for years, and it's fallen on deaf ears. So what we've had to transition to is the economic impact of these folks, refugees, immigrants writ large. Immigrants and refugees create more jobs than native-born Americans. They file more patents than native-born Americans. They do the work that native-born Americans do not want to do. So if you like having chicken, who do you think's carving up the chickens all day? It's not white high school grads in Seymour, in Logansport. It is immigrants. So when we're talking locally in the State House about why are all these immigrants here, it's because they're seeking jobs and filling in jobs that were vacant, right? Yeah. It's not some conspiracy where we're all just bringing Haitians here. Why are Haitians in the middle of Indiana? It's because of jobs. It's not because they love the snow.
Yeah, right. And not only that, but exactly that. Like, they are directly contributing to the economy. I think a statistic, and I don't have the number correct, but something I've seen floating around a lot recently is about the myth busting of undocumented immigrants not contributing to our economy. And they contribute something like $2 or $3 billion in sort of
way more than that.
It might be 9. I was going to say 9, but I'm like, that might not be right. So anyways, billions of dollars that they're contributing. And you can see that here at the local level, not just because you live here, but because you literally work with people and help them get settled and situated. You talk about having to change the messaging from, I also like humanitarian immigrant. Is that what you said before? Right. I'm going to start using that. Humanitarian immigrant to being about the economic, that has to be the messaging. Something that we talk a lot about language on the show and how we develop new language and like how we lose language that maybe is harmful or perpetuating things that we don't need to be perpetuated. Anti-immigrant folks, I think, like to use the words illegal and alien a lot. How have y'all went about resisting things like that? And how do we start to resist the normalization of dehumanizing language like that?
Well, 2 points on that. One is immigration and welcoming refugees to the country is in the DNA of this country.
Right.
Dating back to, religious pilgrims hundreds of years ago to post-World War II era. More recently, like I said, Eastern Europeans fleeing the Soviets, fleeing, the crumbled Central Europe. Even to Irish and Italian immigrants, which I like to bring this up. 150 years ago, those two groups were looked down upon as the bottom rungs, right? Italians weren't even thought of as white people. Nowadays, there's a freaking Olive Garden every 6 miles in major cities. And next month, we're about to put on half the country is going to be drinking green beer, celebrating the Irish, right? Even if you're not Irish. So it took a while to get there, but why can't we see the forest for the trees here, right? Like, immigrants have made giant contributions to our country. We just don't think of Irish and Italians as immigrants anymore because of a few generations ago. But similarly here, if we look at the Burmese population, 30,000 strong now, mostly on the south side, the number of businesses down there, homes that have been built and purchased, car dealerships, insurance, bankers, grocery stores. There's, I think, like 70 churches that are Burmese churches on the south side. They have revitalized the south side of our city in a very positive way. I hope we're celebrating Burmese National Day as a country someday.
That would be great.
Yeah,
we definitely should. Yeah. So I guess I know why. How do you get them to see the economic impact? Because you're living in it, really. And then that is now part of the job that you do, is to try and get people to see. And for whatever reason, like, they continue to deny the the economics of it, the benefit of it for nothing, it feels like, for racism, for hatred and fear. Right. And yet, like, they are so tied up with economics, and they're so like, oh, the economy this. You would think that it would be like, we can at least embrace that aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that they're readers, first of all. So there's a couple studies that I'll point to. Ball State did a good one a couple of years ago about the economic impact of immigrants. But during Trump's first term, he actually commissioned a study at the federal level to see what he thought would be the negative amount of money, the drain on our economy. Turns out, over a 15-year period, immigrants add $63 billion to the economy. The study was not released. It was later leaked, and we cite it all the time.
Yeah.
Odd who the authors were, of course, but, helps our cause. Never released, never talked about, and basically ignored, right? There's actually a book that I just finished recently that I recommend to everyone. It's called The Truth About Immigration by Zeke Hernandez, but it goes through the economic argument, the impacts that they make, the culture that immigrants bring, all of these things that are lost when you're stuck on the racist dogma of our current elected officials.
Yeah. I think that, okay, so now knowing about this study, that makes a ton of sense. That one, they see this and they're like, okay, that does not help our argument, so we're not going to release it. But what we are going to do, what we're going to continue to do is say the government is wasting money. So instead of they are targeting the people, but instead of targeting the people directly, they target the policies and departments that provide that said funding.
Right.
And if they don't have to show disaggregated data of like where this is going and why it's impacting people in a positive way, they can just say this is government waste.
Right. They don't understand long-term investments, it seems. So every refugee coming in has about $3,000 that's tied to them. That does not go very far. That covers some of our administrative costs, but a lot of it's going towards security deposit and first month's rent and a little bit of food, and that money is gone. So there's some other programs we can supplement with, but the amount of money spent per refugee versus what their tax output will be over the course of the rest of their working life here is totally imbalanced in favor of the income they've generated for our country and our community. Further, what a lot of people don't know about refugees, when they travel to the U.S., they're issued a travel loan for their plane ticket. So if you're a family of 5, it's averaged out, that's roughly $5,000 that you have to pay back to the government just to get here in this program that you've been invited to. So what is more American than being immediately in debt when you arrive in this country, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Jeez. And I'm sure there's some sort of interest tax onto that. I hope not.
Thankfully not.
Okay,
but,
great.
I wouldn't want to be coming out of a refugee camp and owing the U.S. government $5,000.
Well, and that's the thing. Like they probably don't even... They might not even understand like that's what is in the deal, like of coming here. And that's it. Like you said, that's the invitation.
Yeah.
But the invite does cost you $5,000.
Yeah. They know. They sign a promissory note and they pay it back.
Probably gladly too.
Oh yeah.
Because they're now in a place where they at least have some semblance of safety.
Right. They can work. They haven't had the chance to work. Some people have been in a camp for 20 years. And before that, maybe they were subsistence farmers, in rural Congo. They haven't had the chance to work, to provide for the families, to send remittances back to families that are impoverished still and living on the edge. So it is a huge gift to these folks, but it's also a gift to our communities to have them here.
100%, both economically, culturally,
absolutely.
And I mean, of the immigrant communities I know, those people will show up for you and go to your events and stuff. And we're trying to connect more people and specifically in the Asian American community here, just trying to be more together and figure out ways to do that. And policies enacting at federal and also state level make that a lot harder. Exodus Refugee has obviously been directly impacted by all of these things going on.
Correct.
To the point of we're having to make these really difficult phone calls. Y'all also have said, nobody come here at the moment. I just wanted to see if you could explain a little bit more about the ways y'all have had to change your operations and what that shift kind of looks like.
So, like you mentioned, we have locked our doors temporarily. We hope to reopen them soon, but we did that out of an abundance of caution for the folks we serve. We 100%. We don't want to congregate a bunch of immigrants in one place and have, ICE or a rogue police officer show up and start, screwing around. So shout out to Chief Bailey, of course, who said he's not interested in doing the feds' immigration work for them. That's not their job. It's not the job of police. They're here to protect local communities and keep them safe, not to terrorize them. So appreciate his words. And refugees, of course, aren't subject to ICE. They're here legally. They were invited by the government, but that doesn't mean, the Venezuelan grandma on the street waiting for the bus who doesn't speak English isn't going to be questioned.
Exactly. Because we look a certain way, or because people look a certain way, that's all that is needed.
Yeah. This is, the way that ICE works is racially profiling. So they're not going to, ask, oh, did you come as a refugee? Did you come as a student? That's not in their wheelhouse. But we also serve other humanitarian immigrants who don't have the protection of refugee status, right? They're maybe working towards asylum, but haven't gotten it yet. They maybe have humanitarian parole status, which is like a temporary status. Trump is looking to end that status, which will essentially make them undocumented. So it's a true evil to both hate undocumented folks, first of all, but also to turn people into undocumented folks and then want to deport them. Same thing's true for TPS, which is called temporary protected status. So that's like there's a hurricane in Haiti. If you're in the U.S. at that time, we don't want to send you back. Your country's having a rough time. For 18 months, we'll allow you to stay, live, and work in safety here. It looks like the Trump administration is going to end all of the TPS it's roughly 20 countries right now. Venezuela, I think, is the first on the chopping block. They've got about 60 days left before Venezuelan TPS runs out. And at that point, they'll be undocumented immigrants.
So is that just like is that an executive order he can just sign and say, we're done with these? No,
it's an order. They just have to do nothing because they come 18 months at a time. Right. If you just don't renew it,
they just let the clock run out.
You let the clock run out and then.
Because the program shut down, so you can't renew.
Right. Correct.
So you have to leave before.
The deadline for them to renew it was this past weekend, and Kristi Noem, the new Homeland Security Secretary, did not do it in time, did not extend it. So, in about 2 months, a lot of Venezuelans that are here are going to need something else. Asylum, some other status, some other protections. But it is not a place where you want to send folks back to. Venezuela, a quarter of the population has fled because it is a very dangerous place run by a dictator at this point.
Is that the country that just said that they would accept our any and all people that we wanted to deport? Was that who that said that?
They will accept folks we want to deport. I think El Salvador is maybe the other one.
El Salvador, okay. Yep. That was. How does that work for y'all then, or how does that shift work at the policy level? Like, because you have temporary, like, don't come here, we'll come to you, I'm assuming, or something, we're figured out. I don't want to say here, or like to give people any ideas of how to get in touch with other people, like keep everybody as safe as possible.
Well, folks can call our office, of course, and we'll figure out a safe place to meet with them. But we do have, we do have 5 or 6, I think, immigration attorneys that we work with on staff. That are helping people file for asylum, that are helping them renew TPS, when they could, get their green cards, which is legal permanent residency, get citizenship, file guardianship, for minors that travel here and need, maybe they're here with an older brother. That older brother can be granted guardianship now and make decisions for them because mom and dad are either deceased or deported or elsewhere. So there's a lot of immigration work to be done, and that's where we're focusing a lot of our efforts right now.
So is it just a ramping up then, or maybe not ramping up, but a doubling down on that work because some of this other work is a little bit nebulous now, or you can't really step into it as much as you want to be able to?
That's true. So At the moment, sort of all things are on full blast because the last couple of months of the Biden administration, he sent everyone he could. So we had some of the busiest months ever in our history.
Yeah.
And it was hard work, but a good thing we did. Otherwise, they wouldn't have
Sure.
made it, right? And they'd be in a camp for, who knows, 4 years, 8 years. And maybe even never have the chance. So we had a busy couple of months and we're still working with those folks. And there's several months out that we'll still be helping them. But for the past year, kind of hedging bets about this election, we've been putting people through extra training. There's something called DOJ accreditation, Department of Justice accreditation, where non-lawyers can learn immigration skills and actually do immigration work.
Interesting.
So we've got about 12 of those folks now on staff that we've been putting through that training to help beef up the legal team.
Is there any fear about that going away?
It could be ended, actually. So Trump is in charge of the Justice Department,
Right.
of course, and appointed his buddy, his attorney general. So that accreditation could evaporate. But thankfully, the knowledge will still be there.
Sure. Could they will those 12 still be able to like operate?
They'll still be able to help. They just won't be able to sign off on the
Okay.
official documents. So
at least having the, I don't want to say bodies, but at least having the people there to help,
right.
Just the influx of people that might
Right.
be coming in.
Right.
And speaking of like, for folks, for refugees or asylees or people that are undocumented or whoever right now that it's like, I think, directly impacted by this, but I don't know what to do, that might be hearing or watching this or finding their way here. Like, what do they need to know right now?
So folks that are within the parameters of our mission, humanitarian immigrants, right? Folks who are seeking asylum, folks who have humanitarian parole or worried about losing it. That's most of the Haitian population, most of the Cuban population, most of the Venezuelan population. Any of these folks can feel free to reach out to our office and call for an appointment. It might be offsite, but we'll see what their needs are, assess if they're eligible for asylum or other protections, and get them to talk to an immigration attorney. Or if they need something else, we'll get them in our English classes. We'll get them into our employment services. There's a lot of things we can help with.
Lots of a lot of different programming. A lot of different partners that you have that can help with that as well.
A lot of it's done in-house, but we do have a lot of good partners. So we've got about 80 staff, employment staff, helping connect with employers and help people find jobs. We've got English teachers on staff. We've got free mental health counseling on staff for those that have been traumatized back home or even re-traumatized here, as it turns out.
Yeah.
But we're doing a lot of that work at our office, and right now trying to push some of that off-site so we don't endanger them while we make a few upgrades to security, as well as train all of our staff on what to do when confronted by ICE, by rogue police officers, etc.
Okay, I love that. That was going to be my next question too, because I saw that you had recently added a new team member, I think a marketing director or someone, I think that I saw you post, and I thought that was really great because one of my worries was like, these organizations are going to have to like let people go because like their work has clearly been directly impacted. I'm sure funding is obviously impacted by that as well. And I'm like, okay, great. And then to me, I was like, okay, that's messaging. Like we got to have these conversations. We got to keep spreading the word.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, you kind of just shared a little bit, but what are y'all currently doing and working on that you would want people to know about? Like you said, you're making some changes around the office. You're beefing up security and things. Like what other things can you share that you want the people to know that they might be able to tap in with?
There's a couple of things. So we started ramping up our advocacy efforts because for the first time since I've been around, we're looking at, I believe, 7 anti-immigrant bills at the Indiana State House. So trying to educate people on those. We're also looking at a lot of anti-immigrant bills, one of which passed already, the Lake and Riley Act at the federal level. And of course, all of these executive orders. So there's a lot of defense to be played right now. So the more that folks are educated, the more calls that they're making to state reps, to our 2 senators and congressmen and women. That is very, very helpful. So we have on our website the ability to join that advocacy newsletter to see what's going on. Second, There's been some great protests that have been popping up here at the State House. Get ICE out of Indiana.
Yep. 400, 500 people or so the other day.
There's another one on Saturday, I believe, 1 o'clock. That is great. We got to get this energy going. We've got to hear from folks on the ground, from immigrants themselves about what they're facing, and that some of them are afraid to leave their houses right now because of this environment that's been built up, right? Whether ICE is down the street or not, it feels like they are, right?
100%.
And then third, we are trying to build a war chest because this is going to be a long 4 years. We're 2 weeks into this, and it has been a real shit show.
Feels like it's been 4 years already.
It has been a real shit show.
Yeah.
So the idea that we're going to have to exist through this for 4 years means we're going to need some ammo, and that's money. That's unrestricted dollars to help us get through these times, to make sure those lawyers are there, to make sure that our counselors are there, to make sure our case managers and our employment specialists, our English teachers are still serving this community as federal funds have frozen up.
Excellent segue into my next question is, how do we then, Naptonians, people in Indianapolis, people in the state of Indiana, how do we best support you in terms of how do we get educated? How do we make sure we're staying educated? How do we get connected with community who are making these calls? I know I've been making calls just on my own, and I know that I've seen a lot of people sharing how it's really kind of nerve-wracking to get on the phone and make these calls and have kind of these conversations with folks. Obviously, extremely necessary. Like you just laid out, like all the things that you're doing, and all of these things we can do. Anything else that we can do here in the city, folks that you, how do we support you best?
Yeah, the calls to elected officials matter, and they do keep track. So it's usually an intern or a staffer. They're not engaging in a debate. They're there to record what the constituents are saying. So you shouldn't be nervous. Just have a plan, even if it's just a couple of sentences. Just tell them how you feel, that you're in their district, and that you'd like them to vote this way on XYZ bill, and that you don't think this person should be confirmed because they don't believe in science. There's ways to speak out right now and flood those phone lines. It's the best way to let our elected officials know how we feel, and also know that we're watching them, and those midterms are not too far away.
No, yeah. All right, I got a couple more questions for you, and I'll let you get out of here and get back to this really important work. Thank you again for taking the time just to school me, but also our audience on everything that's going on right now and all the work that you all are doing. So this episode's coming out on February 13th. I wanted to ask you kind of specifically things in the immediate that we need to be lining up for, making the calls about like a real specific call to action for folks to make sure that we are showing up in this way and supporting.
So at the State House right now, there's a few bills that are very, very concerning. So one of them, for example, would make it illegal for undocumented children to go to school in the state of Indiana. Absolutely ridiculous, likely unconstitutional, and would face a legal challenge if it makes it through to the governor's desk. But the idea that we're even talking about that as a deterrent, like not letting children go to school who didn't decide to come here, right? So these are vulnerable folks' children who they're just trying to educate. We want our community to be educated, right?
Right.
So that's one bill that we're watching. We're also looking at what the State House is trying to do to school districts like IPS, who overwhelmingly are trying to help disadvantaged students. They have E&L classes. They have programs for those with disabilities. All of that is at risk because of a few folks that, frankly, believe IPS is serving Black and brown kids, and they want to dismantle it so they can turn Indianapolis into a charter paradise.
Yeah.
So that will affect the children we serve. That will affect immigrants. That will affect all of our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. This attack on IPS is wild. And yeah, definitely things that we're keeping a look on. I know the next emergency episode we have is going to be focused specifically on some of these bills. We're going to break them all down. So I appreciate you letting us know which ones that you're watching, because again, like this is all interconnected. We talk about, this is the year of community. We talk about community a lot. These are the hidden like ties that we all have. And it's important for us to, if not be educated on the things, at least be aware of what's happening. Because the awareness is going to lead to education, and the education is going to lead to activation. And through activation, hopefully, we're going to make changes that we want to see, not just at the federal level, but in our backyards. All of this is happening all over. We're here in Indianapolis. Again, the show, we're trying to be just focused on what's happening in the city. And I think one of the things that's always surprises me is just how many different people are here and different people make up this community. How many different communities make up this community? Asking everybody in 2025 this question, and I'll close it out with you with this question is, how do you, Cole Varga, define Indianapolis?
It's a very good question. I moved here to Indianapolis in 2005 after college. And it took me a while to figure out what the city was. It's an amazing city. It's got more diversity than you think. It's got more culture than you think. It's got hundreds of different ethnic communities. It's got incredible restaurants up on the 38th Street Lafayette corridor. We've got art. We've got music from all over the world here. It's a gem in the Midwest. And despite what our state house or our governor thinks about Indianapolis or our systems, our institutions like IPS, this is an amazing place to live and raise a family and start a career. And I try to instill that in the folks that we help resettle. Like, they're coming here not knowing much about Indianapolis, right? But when they come here, I want them to feel welcome like the rest of us do when we move here. That Midwestern charm, that Hoosier hospitality, it's been chipped away at recently, and I'd like to restore that in Indiana.
I love that. We wouldn't be the city that we are without our humanitarian immigrant community. And it's it's through this diversification of community, that's through this connection that we make when we go out and like eat at restaurants that we wouldn't normally eat at, because they don't exist in rural Indiana, like where I grew up. But just to be able to step into different places in the city that you live and realize, oh, this is actually also a reflection of the city. It's not just a reflection of the people, but it's also a reflection of myself. It's a powerful, beautiful thing. And we have a beautiful community here, despite what maybe 3 or 4 people might think of it.
That's right.
Cole, thank you so much for coming through and teaching us, educating us, and activating us on immigration, on everything that's happening right now in that realm. And I do have one final question. Sure. Just for those folks who need and want to get tapped in with y'all, what are the best ways to do that? Website, social media, phone numbers? What do you want to share with them to get connected? So
website is exodusrefugee.org. You can see what we're up to, join our newsletter, join our advocacy stuff, buy a really cool t-shirt like you're wearing today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got some yard signs that we're giving out. I'm seeing them pop up around town. You can come pick those up at our office. We do donation drives every once in a while. We did a big soccer ball push this past year to try to get a soccer ball in every family's home. Just such a connector of people, right?
Yes.
A kid with a ball, and you've got friends immediately, right? We're, of course, doing fundraising. We're, of course, doing letter writing campaigns. But I would keep an eye on our Facebook, because we've been doing a lot of Know Your Rights Facebook Lives. Those help not just humanitarian immigrants, but also American citizens who want to know how to help their neighbors out. What do you do when ICE confronts you? What do you have to do if you get pulled over? We're trying to do them in as many languages as possible. So we're doing, I think, Dari soon. We're doing Haitian Creole next week, and trying to share that info out with folks who need it.
Okay, so the Exodus Refugee Facebook page,
That's
you get
right.
a lot of stuff there, and then exodusrefugee.org. Get connected with everything else that you got going on.
Also, Facebook, a great place to hear our rants about all these anti-immigrant policies. So
maybe I need to get back on Facebook.
Yeah,
just to see that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And what was I about to say? Okay, I had something else, but I'm just like, okay, I need to go out and make some calls. Cole Varga, thank you for being here. We're going to have you back to talk a little bit more about your story specifically. But for right now, we're going to stay active. We're going to continue to do the work here on the show and hopefully out in the community. Indianapolis, stay plugged in. ExodusRefugee.org, Exodus Refugee on Facebook. I've been Patrick Armstrong. This is the team, John Overton and Mike Lee behind the cameras. This has been an emergency episode of Conversation Piece. The guests, Cole Varga, The Flowers, Frida's Flowers, and Madeline McKinnon. The space, the Suts Building on Capitol Avenue. If you have any questions or if you want to learn anything else, make sure you go to conversationpiecepod.com. We've got links to stuff. We also have a community care resource page, which has Know Your Rights information on it. I do remember what I was going to say now. I'm going to end with this. White folks, if you've been talking about wanting to be a better ally, a better community member, now is the time to do so, particularly for humanitarian immigrant communities, but for any communities that do not look like you, this is the time where we need y'all to be running interference. So when he talks about the Know Your Rights trainings, it's especially imperative for y'all because that education is going to elevate you to a place of activation where you can step in and actually provide an impactful, productive interference experience and potentially save some lives. So this is the time to act now. Conversation Piece. See y'all soon.
We're good? You all ready? You good? Ready? Good.